Okay, guys, so this week, another spontaneous, sort of crazy last minute episode. I am sick. I am recovering from a cold from a recent debate tournament that our club hosted. Um, and I say that because literally half of our club came down with this infectious disease post tournament, literally like 2 days later. So I'm not the only one, but that will not stop me from providing you guys with some juicy content. So Steven is out of town this week. Elijah is A-OK, and I am struggling to survive at the moment, but we are going to be breaking down for you guys an interesting but frankly underwhelming case that we encountered at this recent tournament, and we're going to be breaking down for you some of the geopolitics, maybe not geopolitics, I need to look at the doc, but we're going to be breaking down for you some interesting stuff with Palestine, with the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency. I think I got that acronym right. Anyway, UNRWA. We're going to be breaking down some cases for you guys, so stay tuned, sit back, and enjoy the show. Okay, guys, and really quick, so this week's episode is brought to you by Nerdsy. Nerdsy has awesome web design. They work with WordPress. I think they can work with Shopify. Just send them your stuff, send them whatever you need done or you're interested in doing, and they'll help you out. They will take care of you ASAP. So you can check them out at nerdsy.net or at nerd.zy on Instagram, at nerd.zy on Instagram. Check them out. They are really good at what they do. So getting started in today's topic. So one of these cases, and Elijah, I'm not sure if you went against this. I think some people in our club did. It's an affirmative case to basically lower the CPFA requirements from their current either 75 or 50% down to 25%. And I say this is a really underwhelming case because it seems to me that what they did, from what I heard, I don't know, but from what I heard, it sounds like they took the skeleton of the original CPFA case that's out there, that's really popular, that people are running.
That's the one
And
to
then
end
they,
all CPFA, right?
right.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And they sort of tweaked the mandate and maybe threw in one or two cards or something to support it and just sort of left it as is. The problem is a lot of the evidence is advocating abolishing CPFA and claiming all their benefits, advantages, and so forth from abolishing it, not from lowering the margins or whatever. So it's sort of a weird case modification, but it really doesn't benefit the affirmative team that much. That's frankly where I'm at with this case. I think it's not really a great idea, and I think teams could probably destroy it just by pointing out how their evidence doesn't support it and maybe run some negative stuff against it, and then just kind of pair that with the fact that their evidence and taglines are probably mismatched a little bit. It's probably kind of a clunky case, and it doesn't appear to be very consistent in the direction or the thought process behind it. If either most people will say CPFA is good because it protects national security and jobs and all these things, or it's bad because of X, Y, and Z, but they don't really say somewhere in the middle. So I think all in all, this is a very flawed case, and I would not recommend running it. But I am open to how my mind changed. Elijah, do you have any thoughts on this? Did you see this case? What can you tell me about it?
I didn't see it, but I would just say remember to get the 1AC. I always forget to grab the 1AC, and then sometimes I'm screwed, and sometimes it's fine because I really don't need it. But this would probably be a case that you would want it, because then you can just be, hey, judge, I have their quote exactly right here, and it says abolishing. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen very carefully, and if the judge wasn't listening very carefully, then you're then that argument wouldn't work out as well.
Right. And I almost wonder if this would be the sort of thing. The problem is, going back to our previous episode where we talked about topical counterplans. Topical counterplans are something really problematic, and I do not suggest doing them. But I almost wonder if there's a way to sort of make the case that you could abolish CPFA and do it as a non-topical counterplan. I guess the way you could do that is argue that it's non-topical because it's transportation policy, which it sort of is, because it was under last year's STOA resolution as a transportation policy case that was very popular. Well, actually, not that popular, but nonetheless a case under the resolution. Um, so, you can make the case that that's under a different branch, it's under the DOT, a different federal department or agency. It's a different set of policy, and then you could advocate reforming it, like their evidence says, and no doubt some evidence that I'd say most teams probably have in their binders or their briefs or whatever. Just go ahead and full on abolish it, and then claim that that's a non-topical counterplan because it doesn't meet the criteria of the resolution.
No, it would.
I don't know. What do you think about it, Elijah?
That sounds like a good idea, but it'd be hard because you still have to the affirmative would just come back saying, yeah, but it affects, and it affects, according to the negative team, it affects the status quo in a good way, which would be reform, and it's directly linked to U.S. aid, so it'd therefore be reforming U.S. aid. So I just like be very careful how I went about that. It's a good
That's
idea,
true.
but I
That's
personally
true.
don't always like counterplans. I know.
I think you're right there. You know, counterplan. Considering what Elijah said, I think you're totally right. I don't think that's necessarily a good way to do it. I wonder. I feel like that'd be a creative way to argue it, but really, I kind of wonder. I don't know, but I wonder if this case is one of those things where you could just argue it, and it would just kind of fall flat on its own in some way, because definitely if their evidence doesn't line up with what they're saying, that's going to be a big problem for them that they have to overcome. And if that's what their 1AC is, then it's going to be pretty tough. If that's the best they can put forward, and their 1AC and their cards don't even support their plan, that's problematic. So, looking at, if they do change that, it could get a little bit trickier, but I don't know. There's a lot of different opinions out there. I think there probably is some evidence out there that they could find saying we should put it to 25%. But I think you could debunk the arguments behind that by simply forcing them into a question of what is the goal here? What is the priority? Do we want to make this efficient, or do we want to make it promote national security, jobs, whatever? Because you
you can't
can't
have your
exactly
cake and
have
eat it.
both.
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
That's what the status quo tries to do with sort of the 50 or 75%. In terms of how many ships are required to meet cargo preference requirements. For those of whom aren't familiar with this, I would urge you all to look into cargo preference requirements for shipping food aid. But basically, the status quo I don't think does a great job of trying to meet either of those goals right now, and this case would just sort of tinker with that, and in some ways not necessarily even do that much. Would they achieve efficiency gains? Yes, they probably would, and they'd probably be noteworthy. But changing the requirement from 50% to 25% is just kind of like, well, why?
Why not all the way? Yeah.
Right. If it's so bad that we need to change it, why not just abolish it? Or if we need to preserve national security in these boats and the industry behind cargo preference regulations, the industry that they cushion, why not make it 100%? So it's a dicey case. I don't think it's a good one. But that's just kind of where I stand. I'm really open though. Anyone listening to this, by all means, comment below what you think about this case. teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. Get in touch with us. I really want to know what our community thinks about this case, because to me this seems like a pretty bad idea, but I'm really open to whatever people think about this. I'm really curious why someone might argue that we should do this. I guess it would just be the flexibility. They're on the fence and they don't have to commit themselves to either no CPFA or full on CPFA. But
while you're plugging our social media, I'm just gonna say we have Facebook and Instagram, so check us out on there. And then also we have the Team Policy email address, so you can actually send us the brief subscriptions, or if you have a longer analysis of this of this case or any other ones that you'd like to mention, you just send it to our email at teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. Really simple, teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to have community involvement with what
feedback
we do.
and definitely. And while you're at it, be sure and check us out on our brand new Instagram page at Team Policy Podcast, which is linked to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Team Policy Podcast, facebook.com/Team Policy Podcast. Or if you're on Facebook already and you don't want to have to type in some messy URL, you can just type in Team Policy Podcast. We'll show up as at Team Policy Podcast on Facebook. So either way, you can find us. We're really easy to find, and we'd love to connect with you guys on this. So let us know your thoughts on this. And moving on to the next case, dealing with Palestine, dealing with UNRWA or the UNRWA, however you want to say it. Really quick, Elijah, I'm curious, because I think we talked about this a little bit at one point. How familiar are you with this case, and what are some of your thoughts before I dive into some of the stuff that I found on it?
I think it was the first one I ran in club because it came out before LRP did. So I
Right.
have a little bit of experience. I don't exactly remember. One thing I always thought is, why would you call it UNRWA? It's UNRWA. You'd call it UNRWA.
Yeah, I think it's just easier to say UNRWA, honestly. I had a coach that pronounced it that way, so that's just how I rolled with it. But
Okay, can you remind me what exactly it's about? It's something to.
absolutely, I kind of had to refresh my mind myself because I don't think anyone's even running this case, frankly. But what it does is it returns the aid that was withheld to the Palestinian or United Nations Relief and Works Agency, I think, for Palestinian refugees. And going into the background of that just briefly, so we gave about 350 million to Palestinian Authority, or to this agency, which then diverted it within the Palestinian Authority in past years. And President Trump withheld that after it became, I don't know if it was after it became aware, but at some point he withheld it. And one of the justifications for that is that, interestingly enough, the Palestinian Authority has a terrorist budget of about $350 million. And,
Whoa!
and funny how that happens. And obviously, this fund's
Coincidental.
probably not going directly into that. But the issue is that whenever you give all this aid to this, I don't want to say country, because technically they're sort of a state, but not necessarily a country. They're not really diplomatically recognized as a country, but they are an entity, I'll say. And whenever you give all this aid to them, and whenever they're run by literally a terrorist organization, Hamas is a democratically elected terrorist organization in Palestine. Whenever you give them all this money, sure, they may not use it on terrorism, but they're going to use it on stuff that they might have had dollars tied up to otherwise. And whenever they don't have to use their own money on that, all of a sudden they have a whole lot more money to burn, and chances are they're going to use that on terrorism if that's their number one goal, which you can see very openly stated. This is not a secret. This is not something they try to hide. This is something they're very open about, that they do not support the creation or the existence of Israel. They do not support to exist for really any Jewish state, and they spend a significant amount of resources trying to attack Israel, to undermine Israel, to raid their border and kill Jews. And it's really sad that that's the case going on in the Middle East, but this is just sort of a continuation of, frankly, what has historically been a conflict dating all the way back to Ishmael and Isaac, in my opinion, where you have Jews and Arabs.
Hey, you're going in and out, and I just didn't hear the last sentence you said.
Okay, we'll have to cut audio with that, but what was the last thing you didn't hear?
That's what I heard.
What was the last thing you did hear?
I forgot.
I don't know where to go back to.
Okay, it was about like 5 It was just like 5 seconds. I don't know what's wrong with your mic.
I don't know, dude. Probably my voice more so than my mic.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to cut all the audio in between. But anyway, so what does all this mean? So the Palestinian Authority, dealing with all these issues with terrorism, things like that. There's a lot going on here, and it's not an easy situation. There's no great answer to it, but some of the justifications, really quickly, for giving the aid really boil down to the fact that um, there's fear that if you stir up the Palestinians, they already hate Israel. They already want to see Israel burn to the ground. So if you stir them up anymore by cutting off their aid or making them mad, then they'll just storm across the border right now and start a war. Um, Although that hasn't happened clearly, but the argument is that it could happen. Um,
I don't think they'd probably
and
do that because they're way smaller than Israel, and Israel has a lot more weapons.
Right. So realistically, there's no way Palestine can win a war against Israel. So they would have to get all the other surrounding Arab states to support them. But the next concern is that um, whenever, okay, so say this doesn't start a war now, but in several years, as the Palestinians continue to grow in population size, they continue to get more and more angry, and you have more and more starving people because a lot of the aid to them is humanitarian aid. Um, and one of the arguments is that, yeah, their government might spend that money indirectly on terrorism, but they're going to spend money on terrorism regardless. Thing is, if you don't give them this aid, they won't help their own people with things like hospitals or schools. And so, if we don't do this, then you're going to have a humanitarian crisis with so many million people in the next few years. And one way or another, that's going to pose a problem. And under the Obama administration, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, made comments about, actually now under the Trump administration, former U.S. ambassador from the then Obama administration is the ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, came out and made comments about how when President Obama was in power, the Israelis actually supported, or at least did not oppose, aid to UNRWA or the UNRWA, which then funnels that money into Palestine, basically. And this goes back to the argument that Israel does not want to have to deal with a humanitarian crisis, right? Because if you let time run its course and not do anything, it's going to break out into a war or some sort of conflict that Israel does not want to have to deal with. So they, for a while, were supportive of the status quo.
That makes sense.
Okay, looking at, I think there's one more thing with this. So reasons to cut off aid. Those were some of the kind of the background of this, and some of the support, I guess, by Israel at one point in time for just preserving the status quo. Now looking at the flip side a little bit, President Trump has since cut this aid, and so far it hasn't really done very much. Palestine probably hates us, but to be fair, they probably weren't our friends in the first place. They want their government, Hamas, which is democratically elected and is recognized as a terrorist organization, I believe, publicly despises Israel, and Israel is clearly our ally. So Palestine is not our friend by any means. And since we've cut this aid to this agency which supports Palestine, the Israelis have come out strongly in support of the Trump administration doing this. Since they're our ally, it in some sense it makes sense, I guess, for a negative team to argue that we should support our ally and we should not return this money. Affirmatives are going to try to argue that we need to give back this money, or else it's going to create all these problems on Palestine's side. So really what this comes down to, I know I'm rambling, but the summary here is that you have the choice between, in some way, appeasing or appealing to the Palestinians by trying to give them stuff, give them aid, give them whatever, and just hope that they'll be peaceful
But
in the long term.
that still is funding terrorism.
Right. at least indirectly, by cost reallocation. And you have the option to preserve the status quo, the now status quo, which is not giving aid to them. Granted, it might increase the likelihood of confrontation in the
Might.
near future, but at least we're not supporting the people who, as soon as we stop supporting them, they want to supposedly turn around and stab us in the back. So those are the arguments there. I think history supports not appeasing countries or states or entities which are very violent and want to attack other nations. I think we should look back to
World War II.
history. Yeah, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany could have been stopped at so many points had we not appeased Hitler and let him have this territory or let him have this or that. Um, and so I look at this from a historical perspective and see that there's no good solution in sight. So we shouldn't try to appease Palestine. That's where I stand. Um, I don't think that's the only view out there. I think there's lots of other views which maybe have equally valid points, but I think at the end of the day, Palestine is never going to peace if they continue to democratically elect terrorist groups to run their government. Um, I don't know. That's where I stand on it. I think, if you also look at some of the history behind it with peace negotiations with Palestine, between Israel and Palestine. So many times Israel has offered to give Palestine everything they want, and they have rejected it, and they've resorted to attacking Israel. So that's really my position on it, Elijah. And wrapping this up, where do you stand on this? What do you think are arguments that teams might make?
Yeah, I don't really want to beat a dead horse. You pretty much said everything that there is. Yeah, I kind of like. Additionally, I like the idea of just having our hands off, not having the money uh, that'll shoot ourselves in our own foot. Well, I guess Hamas doesn't get us. It gets Israel. They're our allies. So I just like hands off. Don't give them any of this filthy money.
Right. Don't support this state which chooses to use most of its money to attack
Yeah.
their neighboring country. Awesome. Okay, well, I think that basically wraps it up. Last but not least, I just want to remind everybody, do check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Team Policy Podcast. Check out our brand new Instagram page at on Instagram at Team Policy Podcast. And be sure and drop a comment, drop a like on our YouTube videos. We really appreciate that. Subscribe if you feel like it. And we will see you guys in the next episode of the Team Policy Podcast.
And don't forget to send us brief ideas, comments, questions to our email at teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. We would really love if you guys respond to us, because this is not like a laborious and a labor intensive thing that we have to do for some school project. We actually like doing this. It's interesting to analyze. So thank you for listening, and until next time.